Do you have any relationships where someone else does all the talking? Today on God's Word Gives Hope. Welcome to the God's Word Gives Hope podcast, where we are passionate about connecting His Word to your life. This podcast provides opportunities to further feed your soul or simply be replenished by listening. We are glad you're here. Well, welcome back. I'm Amy.
And I'm Janae. We are on our fourth week of our Living Fearless series. We have received great feedback on how the series is impacting you, our listeners and viewers. Wrestling with our fears. I just feel like that is a part of life that maybe touches everyone.
Absolutely. I feel like every single person I've ever talked to has experienced fear and had to work through it at some point. But before we dive into today's verses, we still want to mention that we have a YouTube channel and it is up and running. So if you want to listen and just do the regular podcast, that's totally fine. That's always going to be available. But if you want to see facial expressions or even just feel like you're sitting down and having a cup of coffee with us, check out the God's Word Gives Hope podcast YouTube channel. You can subscribe to it. You can share it with others. And this channel is just one more way that we can help bring God's Word into the everyday spaces of your life. So if YouTube works better for you or friends, please share it with them. Now, if you remember last week, we ended our time by repeating the fact that David believed that God will move on his behalf. And then we invited you to create a proactive plan that will help you walk in obedience and have a grateful heart. So did you have a chance to do that? If not, or if you have no idea what we're talking about, I highly suggest going back and listening to last week's episode and create a proactive plan for obedience. Now, today we're going to cover verses 7 through 11 of Psalm 27. Hear me as I pray, O Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And my heart responds, Lord, I am coming. Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path, for my enemies are waiting for me.
So David starts the song of Psalms 27 out strong with confident statements about who God is and states how he's going to be confident. And then as we looked at last week, he reiterated this idea of having a proactive plan on how he's going to respond when fear comes knocking. Then we hit verse 7, which is what we're going to focus in today, verses 7, 8, and 9. And it may seem like he has a bit of a less confident tone. And he could be that part of back and forth that we have and we experience. When he says, hear me as I pray, be merciful as I pray, it may feel like David is pleading with God. But we can have different tones in our voice that really changes the dynamic and the meaning. So a pleading, desperate tone may say something like, hear me as I pray, O Lord, be merciful and answer me. Where a confident tone may pray the same prayer, but say it like this. Hear me as I pray, O Lord, be merciful and answer me. So whether he was bouncing back and forth or not, the overall tone of Psalm 27 is a little bit more on the confident side. So maybe he was being confident here, because in verse 6, just right before last week, we were talking about how David was holding his head up high. He was walking in confidence and worshiping God. So then he rolls into verse 7 with his prayer of request for God to hear him and be merciful and to answer his prayer. I love that he stops and addresses God this way, because it reminds us that we are in a conversation with God. We have a personal relationship with him. He is not distant and aloof. He is the God who sees us. He is Emmanuel. He's God with us. And as we move on, we can see that there is actually a two-way conversation happening here, because after he confidently asks God to bend his ear towards him and have mercy mercy on him. David says in verse 8, my heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And other translations say God is saying seek his face, which is an intimate gesture. When we think about being close enough to be face to face with someone, like sometimes they may be too much in your personal space, but in a good way for a close friend, that shows a safeness and an intimacy there. So I wonder how often, listeners, do we leave our prayers with requests for God to answer us? We like vomit everything out on to God, and then that's kind of it. But do we still ourselves down to listen in response to what God may have to say to us? Do we consider our prayer life to be this intimate conversation with Jesus? I don't know.
You know, I think sometimes the way prayer is taught, it can almost sound like a formula or an equation. Like if I do A and I say B, then God will clearly do C. And it's just so much more than that. It is a relationship. If I was to approach my husband, do all the talking, never let him talk, only say what I need from him, and never ask about his day or the things that maybe he wants for our family or for our lives, we would not have a relationship. If I did that with my daughter, we would not have a relationship. We want to be people who want to know God and seek his face, not just his hands and his provision.
Yes, that's so good. It reminds me of Brother Lawrence. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, Practicing the Presence. It's really tiny, but packed with amazing nuggets. But the premise is that whether we're washing our hands or walking into a board meeting, that we need to be in this mindset of practicing the presence of God. And part of that is attuning and always being listening to him. We never know when he might be speaking to us and want to say something to us. So do we practice the presence of God, attuning ourselves to hear him when he may want to speak? And I love questions that put us more in a listening posture. And two of my favorite ones is, God, what do you want me to know?
Mm.
And then the second one follows right up behind that. What do you want me to do? Is there anything you want me to do? So we've shared, we've poured out our heart, and then we're stopping and we're being still and engaging God to speak back to us, which is what David did. And I love David's response to God's invitation to come and talk with him or to seek his face. And David replies, Lord, I'm coming. Or Lord, your face I will seek. It reminds me of Isaiah's response to God in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8, where he says, then I heard the Lord asking, whom should I send as a messenger to this people? Who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. Which in the light of our topic of dealing with our fears, I think we need to think about having this sense of readiness to follow God wherever he might lead us, so that if we're in the middle of our fears and we're like, God, I'm afraid of this and I'm thinking this way, and the enemy's wanting me to think that you're not going to come through with me, and you're telling him all of your fears and pouring yourself out, but then we position ourselves really with a sense of surrender, a sense of readiness to do whatever God may lead us to do in the middle of our fears. I think that should be a part of our proactive plan, to have that kind of spirit of surrender.
I think so too. Surrender is, to me, it's a hard word. It's not, it's so easy to say, and it's sometimes really difficult to walk out. Surrender, as many of you know, if you've been listening, is one of my words for this year. And God called me to surrender some incredibly big things. And I mean, I'll just be completely honest. I have not always had the best attitude about it. I have not always been in a place of like, whatever you want, Lord, here I am, send me. But in the end, just like David, if he's having highs and lows, we can always go to God and share those things and then remember our confidence in who he is. And so surrender is a beautifully hard thing, I think, to walk out. But let's keep going. We've got verses 9 and 10 next. It says, "Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Do not leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and my mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close." Now, from what I've read, it may be that even in David's confidence, he's not a huge fan of God's timing at the moment. Like he's asking God to move and does not
I think
feel
we
like
can totally relate to that.
Right. I know none of us have ever experienced God not moving in our timetable. But even in the midst of all of this, I love that David, again, he confidently approaches and he reminds himself and God about who each of them are. David is a servant. He is submitted to the will of God, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult. God has always been his helper. And he uses those words, always been. So he's not doubting God in this. He's reminding himself, even if it doesn't look exactly like I hope it will, God has always been my helper. He's going to come through in this. And here's just a little fun aside. That word helper is the feminine verb, but it actually finds its root in a male verb called ezer. And that word, ezer, is actually the word for helper that God used when he created Eve and said that he made a helper suitable for Adam. And what I love is how rich this word helper is, because other than that garden instance, almost every other use of ezer or one of the variations of helper is God like coming alongside his creation and helping his people. And so David is just reminding God, you are my helper. You are coming alongside and you are going to give me the strength that I need here. And it is interesting that he says, don't forsake me, don't abandon me, because it almost seems like he's questioning it, right? Then he says the statement like, even if my father and my mother abandon me, and I looked because we know who David's father is. We don't know a lot about his mother, but we know his father is Jesse. And so some of this could be that his parents have passed away. And so in that way, they are no longer there to be of help to him. But it could also be the fact that David was kind of the least of Jesse's kids, left out to the field. He was the shepherd, kind of forgotten almost when Samuel came to anoint the next king. And there are even other ideas that this could be even more dramatic, but no matter what happened in David's life that drew him to say this thing about, even if my father and a mother abandoned me, he was struggling with abandonment. And I think we've all experienced abandonment in one way or another, emotionally, relationally, physically. But just like David, we can confidently say, no matter who it is who does this thing, who abandons, who hurts me, I know that God will not. God does not. And just like we've said in previous weeks, David is speaking so clearly here that God will hold him close. Mm-hmm. And listener, I just want you to know, God will never abandon you. God will and is holding you close, no matter what circumstance it is that you are walking through right now. You are not forsaken and you are not forgotten. Right. And it reminds me of a song that I heard in the midst of all this move stuff. We had just had the big conversation with the company that Nathan took the job with. And Nathan said, okay, I think this is going to be it. And we were out of town. I was at a conference and there was an artist there singing named Tasha Layton. And she sang a song called Never. And it is just a constant reminder in that song of how God never forsakes us and never abandons us. And it's true. He never will.
That is so good. And that is one of those repetitive statements that we can tell ourselves and remind ourselves often, just to reinforce the truth of that, because we don't always feel that. So that's so good. Well, verse 11 picks up with a personal prayer piece again, where David is inviting God to teach him and lead him, where he's just kind of moving through, like, I'm in this fear place, but these are my proactive plans on how I'm going to do it. This is the way I see you. It's the way I'm going to handle it. And so teach me how to live, oh God. It's sort of his way of asking that question of, what do you want me to know? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to go? Teach me how to live, oh Lord. Lead me along the right path, for my enemies are waiting for me. I love the idea of having a teachable spirit. It comes back to me that the word surrender, having a surrendered spirit, not as in roll over and like give up, but a surrender of your will, like a yielding, like, God, you go first and I'm going to follow you type of surrender. And listener, that's where we want to kind of land today with you. Is we want to challenge you for some time throughout this week, not just one time. Like, if you can, that would be great. Get one time where you're all alone by yourself in a serene place and uninterrupted. Hands
That sounds like heaven.
Yes, laying on your laps, and you're surrendering and listening to God. But we really want to challenge you to do more than that. We just want you to think about being in a listening position throughout your entire week. Every time you can draw yourself back to the idea that, Emmanuel, God is with me right now. God, is there something you want to be speaking and saying to me? Here I am. I am listening to you. What does God want you to know as you face your fears?
Well, that wraps up our time for today. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and whatever platform it is that you're listening or watching on. Remember to subscribe, listen, comment, rate, share. Give us a blood sample. No, not really, but really, we just appreciate you engaging with us in this community, because it just continues to help get the word out about God's word gives hope. Now, we want to do a little something different over this prayer time with you. I mentioned the song Never by Tasha Layton, and I would like to read the first verse and the chorus over you. I also want to encourage you to listen to the whole song. The link will be in the show notes so that you can. Now take a moment, close your eyes, unless you are driving, be wise, but listen to these lyrics. When this broken world is breaking me down, when my tears and knees both fall to the ground, when my questions make me doubt you more than ever, you remind me that your answer is always never. Never forgotten, never forsaken, never abandoned, not for a second. I am safe in your hands always and forever. You're never not working. My heart is the proof. There's not a broken too broken for you. Will there ever come a day when you're not holding me together? You say never. The connecting doesn't have to stop here. We would love to have you join us at the God's Word Gives Hope blog to go deeper with the verse we discussed today. If you'd like to learn more about life and leadership coaching with Janae, visit JanaeShatleyCamp.com. Finally, we would love a chance to talk with you more. Find us on Instagram or Facebook. All of these links are in the About Us on our podcast.